December 26, 1996, at 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey dialed 911. Her voice trembling, she reported that her 6-year-old daughter JonBenét was missing. A ransom note demanding $118,000 sat on the kitchen stairs. But 8 hours later, John Ramsey found his daughter's body in the basement of their own home. The ransom note was fake. JonBenét had never left the house. And what followed became one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. Before we begin this investigation, if you appreciate the research and work that goes into these documentaries, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. It truly helps us continue bringing you these deep dive investigations. Thank you. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey, a case that captivated the world, destroyed a family, and exposed critical failures in criminal investigation. For 28 years, questions have haunted everyone who has followed this case. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? And why has justice remained so elusive? What happened in that Boulder mansion on Christmas night remains one of the most analyzed and debated mysteries in modern crime. The investigation revealed details that shocked even veteran detectives, contradictions that continue to fuel theories, and DNA evidence that would challenge everything investigators thought they knew. Boulder, Colorado, December 25, 1996, Christmas Day. The Ramsey family attended a dinner party at a friend's house that evening. JonBenét, a child beauty pageant competitor with blonde hair and a bright smile, seemed happy and healthy throughout the celebration. She wore a Christmas outfit and played with the other children at the party. The family returned home around 9:30 p.m. According to her parents, JonBenét was asleep when her father carried her to bed. She was wearing a red turtleneck that her mother had laid out, but John said he found her in different clothes when he put her to bed. It was the last time they would see their daughter alive. The Ramsey home was a large Tudor-style mansion at 755 15th Street in Boulder, one of the more affluent neighborhoods in the city. The house had multiple levels, including a complex basement layout with several rooms. John Ramsey was a successful businessman, the president and CEO of Access Graphics, a computer services company that had recently become a billion-dollar subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. Patsy Ramsey was a former Miss West Virginia who had devoted herself to raising their 2 children and managing their household. Their son, Burke, was 9 years old. The family appeared, by all external measures, to be living an ideal American life. But on the morning of December 26th, that life shattered completely. The morning of December 26th began with confusion and terror. Patsy Ramsey woke up around 5:30 a.m. and began her morning routine. As she descended the spiral staircase from the bedroom level to the kitchen, she discovered several sheets of white paper laid out on one of the steps. She picked them up and began reading. It was a ransom note. The note was handwritten on paper from a notepad inside the Ramsey home. It was unusually long for a ransom note, 2.5 pages. Most ransom notes are brief, often just a few sentences with demands and warnings. This one was detailed, almost theatrical in its presentation. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your bussiness, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession." The misspellings were notable. Business was spelled bussiness, and possession was spelled possession. The note continued with specific instructions and threats. It demanded exactly $118,000 in cash to be delivered in a brown paper bag. The money was to be in specific denominations, $100,000 in $100 bills and $18,000 in $20 bills. That specific amount immediately stood out. It was nearly identical to John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus from Access Graphics, which was $118 and $117 and $50. How would a stranger, a member of a small foreign faction, know that precise detail about John Ramsey's compensation? The note warned the family not to contact police, the FBI, or any other authority. It stated that JonBenét would be beheaded if they did not follow instructions precisely. It said the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. with further instructions for delivering the ransom. The note ended with, "Victory, SBTC." The meaning of SBTC has never been definitively determined. Patsy's screams brought John running downstairs. They immediately checked JonBenét's bedroom. Her bed was empty. Burke was asleep in his room. Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m., despite the ransom note's explicit warning not to contact authorities. The 911 call recording captured Patsy's panicked voice. "We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please." The dispatcher asked questions, trying to get information. Patsy said her daughter was blonde, 6 years old, and that she had found a ransom note. John Ramsey could be heard in the background. At the end of the call, there has been extensive debate about what was said after Patsy believed she had hung up. Some audio experts claim to hear Burke's voice asking, "What did you find?" which would contradict the Ramseys' statement that Burke remained asleep and unaware. Other experts dispute this interpretation of the audio. Boulder police were dispatched immediately. At 5:59 a.m., just 7 minutes after the 911 call, Officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey residence. He was the first law enforcement officer on scene. This moment would prove to be critical, and the decisions made in the next few hours would shape the entire investigation. Officer French's initial assessment was that this was a kidnapping case. He had a ransom note. He had a missing child. He had frantic parents. He conducted what he later described as a cursory search of the house, looking for signs of forced entry or the missing child. He checked the main floor and the upper floors. He then went to the basement. The basement of the Ramsey home was a complex space. It had multiple rooms, including a boiler room, a storage area, and a wine cellar. The wine cellar was a small room accessible through a white wooden door secured with a simple wooden latch. Officer French approached this door during his search. He later testified that he tried the door but did not open it. He stated that the wooden latch appeared to be secured from the outside, leading him to believe that no one could be inside the room. He moved on without opening the door. This decision would be identified later as one of the most catastrophic mistakes in the early investigation. JonBenét's body was behind that door. As morning progressed, the Ramsey home began to fill with people. This was another critical mistake in crime scene management. John Ramsey called his pilot and arranged for the family to fly to Atlanta later that day for a planned trip. Patsy called friends, asking them to come over for support. Within an hour, several friends had arrived at the house, including Fleet and Priscilla White, John and Barbara Fernie, and Reverend Raul Hoverstock from the Ramseys Church. These well-meaning friends moved throughout the house, attempting to comfort the distraught parents. They prepared food in the kitchen. They sat in the living room. They walked through various rooms. Each person who entered the house and moved through its rooms was potentially contaminating what should have been treated as a crime scene from the moment police arrived. The protocol for a reported kidnapping should have been to immediately secure the house, limit access to essential personnel only, and preserve all potential evidence. Instead, the Ramsey home became a gathering place for friends and family, with multiple people touching surfaces, moving objects, and destroying the pristine condition of potential evidence. Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the Ramsey home around 8 a.m. She was assigned to take over the investigation and wait with the family for the ransom call that the note promised would come between 8 and 10 a.m. Detective Arndt was experienced, but she arrived alone. In her later testimony and interviews, she described feeling increasingly concerned about being the only detective on scene for a case of this magnitude. She requested backup multiple times. She asked for additional detectives, for crime scene technicians, for FBI agents. Her requests were not fulfilled in a timely manner. She found herself alone, responsible for managing a potential kidnapping case, monitoring the distraught family, coordinating with the friends who had gathered, and trying to maintain some semblance of control over the scene. The promised ransom call never came. 8 a.m. passed, 9 a.m. passed, 10 a.m. passed, no call. Detective Arndt watched John Ramsey carefully. She later testified that his behavior seemed unusual to her, though she struggled to articulate exactly what seemed off. He appeared to be going through mail at one point. He left the room several times. But grieving parents often behave in ways that seem strange to observers. There is no guidebook for how to act when your child has been kidnapped. As the hours ticked by with no ransom call, the dynamics of the investigation began to shift. If this was truly a kidnapping for ransom, why hadn't the kidnappers called? The silence was ominous. It suggested that perhaps this was not a kidnapping at all. At 1 p.m., nearly 7 hours after police first arrived and more than 7 hours since the ransom call window had closed, Detective Arndt made a decision. She asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again from top to bottom. She instructed them to look for anything unusual, anything that might have been missed, anything that might provide a clue about JonBenét's whereabouts. This decision to have the victim's father search the house has been criticized extensively by law enforcement experts. A proper search should have been conducted by trained investigators who would recognize evidence, maintain chain of custody, and avoid contaminating the scene. Allowing family members to conduct the search violated basic investigative protocols. John Ramsey and Fleet White began on the upper floors and worked their way down. They checked closets, bathrooms, and bedrooms. Then they went to the basement. Fleet White checked the train room first. Then John Ramsey went directly to the wine cellar. He opened the white wooden door. The latch that had stopped Officer French from opening it earlier that morning was not secured. John Ramsey later said he had opened it himself during an earlier search, though this timing has been debated. Inside the small windowless room on a white blanket on the concrete floor was JonBenét. John Ramsey screamed. The sound brought Fleet White running. John immediately reached down and picked up his daughter's body. He pulled the duct tape off her mouth. He carried her out of the wine cellar, through the basement, and up the stairs to the main floor. Detective Arndt heard the commotion and saw John Ramsey emerging from the basement, carrying JonBenét's lifeless body. He laid her on the floor in the living room. Detective Arndt immediately saw that the child was deceased. JonBenét's skin was pale with areas of purplish discoloration consistent with lividity, the settling of blood after death. Her body was in full rigor mortis, meaning her muscles had stiffened, a process that typically begins 2 to 4 hours after death and becomes complete after 12 hours. There was a white cord loosely tied around JonBenét's right wrist. Another cord, fashioned into a garrote with a wooden stick used to twist and tighten it, was embedded in the skin of her neck. She was wearing a white long-sleeve shirt and white long underwear with a star pattern. The clothing was not what she had been wearing to bed, according to her parents. Detective Arndt immediately knew that the crime scene had been catastrophically compromised. John Ramsey had moved the body, destroying critical information about the position and condition of JonBenét as she had been left by whoever killed her. The blanket she had been wrapped in was now disturbed. The duct tape was removed. Any trace evidence that might have been on the tape's adhesive surface had potentially been contaminated. Detective Arndt attempted to take control of the scene. She covered JonBenét's body with a blanket and moved people away from the immediate area. But the damage was done. The crime scene that should have been meticulously documented and processed had been irreparably altered. What happened in the hours and days that followed would shape this case into one of the most controversial and debated investigations in American criminal history. The autopsy of JonBenét Ramsey was conducted on December 27, 1996, by Dr. John Meyer, the Boulder County coroner. What he found painted a horrific picture of the final moments of a 6-year-old child's life. The official cause of death was asphyxiation, due to strangulation associated with cranial trauma. JonBenét had sustained 2 catastrophic injuries, either of which could have been fatal. The first injury was a massive blow to the head. The right side of JonBenét's skull showed an 8.5-inch linear fracture with an associated rectangular area of hemorrhagic contusion on the right side of her brain. This was not a minor injury. The force required to cause this type of skull fracture in a child is tremendous. Experts later estimated it would be equivalent to falling from a 2-story building onto a hard surface, or being struck with a heavy object swung with extreme force. The head injury had caused a significant subdural hematoma, a collection of blood between the brain and the skull. The injury would have rendered JonBenét unconscious almost immediately. However, the autopsy findings indicated that she did not die instantly from the head wound. Her brain showed swelling that takes time to develop, suggesting she survived for a period after the initial blow, though likely unconscious. The second injury was strangulation by garrote. A cord, identified as white nylon cord similar to that used in the art of macrame, had been tied around JonBenét's neck. Attached to this cord was a wooden stick, later identified as a piece of one of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrush handles. The stick had been used to twist the cord, tightening it progressively around JonBenét's neck in the manner of a garrote, a device designed to strangle. The cord had cut deeply into the skin of her neck, creating a furrow that measured approximately 1/4 to 1/2 inch wide. There was petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, small red spots caused by broken capillaries, a classic sign of strangulation. Her face showed some congestion and her tongue protruded slightly, both consistent with asphyxiation. The critical question for investigators and pathologists was the sequence and timing of these injuries. Did the head blow come first or the strangulation? How much time passed between the two? Dr. Meyer's autopsy findings, combined with later expert analysis, suggested that the head injury came first. The brain swelling indicated that JonBenét's heart was still beating for some time after the skull was fractured, pumping blood into the damaged area. Most experts who have reviewed the case believe that JonBenet was struck on the head first, rendering her unconscious, and then, anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours later, the garrote was applied. This timing has profound implications for understanding what happened. It suggests that whoever killed JonBenet had time to think, to act, to make decisions after the initial head injury. This was not a single moment of violence. This was a sequence of events that unfolded over time. The autopsy revealed other findings that have been the subject of extensive analysis and debate. There was evidence of prior vaginal trauma that appeared to be chronic rather than acute. Some experts interpreted this as evidence of prior sexual abuse. Others argued that the findings could have innocent explanations, such as masturbation or chronic irritation from bubble baths or infection. No semen was found. There was no definitive evidence of sexual assault on the night of her death, though the findings remain ambiguous and controversial. JonBenét's stomach contents indicated that she had eaten pineapple a few hours before her death. This detail became significant because a bowl of pineapple with a spoon in it was found on the kitchen table of the Ramsey home. The bowl had Burke's fingerprints on it, as well as Patsy's fingerprints on the bowl itself. Both John and Patsy Ramsey stated that they did not feed JonBenet pineapple that night and did not know when or how she ate it. This unexplained pineapple has become one of the small mysteries within the larger mystery of the case. There were other injuries documented in the autopsy. JonBenet had abrasions on her back and the right side of her face. There was a triangular bruise on her shoulder. On her lower back were 2 small marks, roughly circular, that some experts believed could be from a stun gun. Others disputed this, saying the marks were not consistent with stun gun injuries and could have been from any number of sources. The autopsy also documented the ligatures found on JonBenet. Her hands were loosely bound above her head with white cord. The binding was so loose that her hands could easily have slipped out. This raised questions about whether the binding was functional or merely for appearance. Why tie someone's hands in a way that would not actually restrain them? The duct tape over her mouth was a single piece of black duct tape. When John Ramsey removed it in his panic upon finding her, potential evidence was lost. The tape was later tested for fingerprints and DNA, with mixed results that we'll discuss shortly. Dr. Meyer estimated the time of death to be somewhere between 10 p.m. on December 25th and 6 a.m. on December 26th, based on the condition of the body, the stomach contents, and the progression of rigor mortis and livor mortis. This wide window reflects the difficulty of precisely determining time of death. The autopsy report became a crucial document in the investigation, but like much of the evidence in this case, it raised as many questions as it answered. How could a child be killed in her own home, with her family present, without anyone hearing or seeing anything? The head injury would likely have made some sound. The strangulation process, if she had been conscious, would have involved struggle. Yet no one reported hearing anything unusual that night. The physical evidence collected from JonBenet's body and from the crime scene would become the subject of intense forensic analysis, legal battles, and scientific debate for the next 3 decades. The ransom note found on the staircase became one of the most analyzed documents in criminal history. Handwriting experts, linguists, forensic document examiners, and amateur sleuths have scrutinized every word, every letter, every punctuation mark. The note was written on white-lined paper from a pad found in the Ramsey home. The pad was a normal notepad kept near the kitchen telephone. Investigators found the pad with the ransom note pages torn from it. Even more tellingly, they found what appeared to be a practice start to the note. On a page in the pad, someone had written Mr. and Mrs. R before stopping. This suggested that the note writer had started to write the note, reconsidered the greeting, and started over. The final version of the note began Mr. Ramsey, rather than addressing both parents. The note was written with a black felt-tip Sharpie pen that was also from the Ramsey home. The length of the note was extraordinary. Most ransom notes in real kidnapping cases are brief, often just a few sentences. Kidnappers want to communicate their demands and threats quickly, and then distance themselves from the crime. They don't want to spend time writing lengthy documents that could be interrupted or that provide more handwriting samples for analysis. The JonBenet ransom note was 2.5 pages long, containing approximately 370 words. It included multiple paragraphs, specific instructions, elaborate threats, and even what seemed like movie references. The language and tone of the note struck many observers as strange, almost theatrical. It used phrases like "and hence" and "attaché," referring to an attaché case for carrying the ransom money. It referenced Southern common sense, which seemed oddly specific. It contained the dramatic phrase, "The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them." The note's author referred to themselves variously as "we," a group, and "I," an individual, creating ambiguity about whether this was written by one person or multiple people. The inconsistency could have been intentional misdirection, or could have been an error revealing that only one person wrote the note while trying to pretend to be a group. Some analysts noted that certain phrases in the note appeared to reference movies. "Don't try to grow a brain" is similar to a line from the movie Speed. "Use that good Southern common sense of yours" echoes language from the movie Ransom, which had been released just weeks before JonBenét's death. The closing "victory" SBTC has been interpreted multiple ways, but some have connected it to military or religious terminology. The handwriting itself became a major focus of investigation. The Boulder Police Department brought in multiple handwriting experts to analyze the note and compare it to writing samples from John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and others connected to the case. The results were inconclusive but suggestive. John Ramsey was excluded by most experts as the author of the note. His handwriting showed significant differences from the ransom note. Patsy Ramsey, however, could not be excluded. Some experts said her handwriting shared similarities with the note. Others said the differences were too significant to conclude she wrote it. No expert would definitively say that Patsy wrote the note, but several said she could not be ruled out as the author. The Ramseys provided handwriting samples, though not immediately. It took several days before they complied with police requests for exemplars. When Patsy provided samples, investigators noted that her handwriting appeared to change somewhat from sample to sample, as if she were trying to disguise her natural writing style. This observation added to suspicions but proved nothing definitively. Burke Ramsey, who was 9 at the time, was also asked to provide handwriting samples. His writing was determined to be too immature and undeveloped to have produced the ransom note. Over the years, more than 70 suspects and persons of interest have had their handwriting compared to the ransom note. None have been positively identified as the author. Linguistic analysis of the note revealed interesting patterns. The writer appeared to be educated, using relatively sophisticated vocabulary and sentence structure. However, there were also grammatical errors and misspellings, which could have been genuine mistakes or could have been intentional attempts to mislead investigators about the writer's education level. The specific ransom amount of $118,000 remained one of the note's most compelling elements. This figure was strikingly close to John Ramsey's bonus. If an intruder wrote the note, how would they know this information? John's bonus amount was not public knowledge. It was specific financial information that would primarily be known to the Ramsey family and perhaps to people within Access Graphics who handled payroll and compensation. The fact that the note was written on materials from inside the home, the notepad, the pen, suggested that either an intruder spent considerable time in the house before and possibly after the murder, or someone already in the home wrote the note. An intruder scenario would require the perpetrator to enter the home, locate writing materials, spend significant time composing a lengthy note, including a practice start that was discarded, commit the murder, hide the body, place the note on the stairs, and exit the home. All of this would need to happen without waking anyone in the house. The content of the note also raised questions. If this was a genuine kidnapping for ransom, why was JonBenét's body left in the house? Typically, in a kidnapping, the child would be taken from the home to a location where the kidnappers could control the situation and wait for ransom payment. Leaving the body in the basement contradicted the entire premise of the ransom note. This contradiction led many investigators to conclude that the ransom note was not genuine, but rather was staged to misdirect the investigation. If the note was staged, the question became, who staged it and why? One theory proposed that JonBenet died accidentally or in a moment of rage, and the ransom note was created to make it appear that an intruder had kidnapped and killed her. This would explain why the note was so long, the writer had time to craft it, and why it contained elements that seemed theatrical or drawn from movies. The writer was creating a scenario rather than documenting a real kidnapping. Another theory held that an intruder wrote the note, perhaps planning a kidnapping, but something went wrong. Perhaps JonBenét woke up, recognized the intruder, or screamed. The intruder panicked, killed her, and fled, leaving the note behind. The ransom note remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the case. It is both crucial and confounding, pointing in multiple directions depending on how one interprets its origin and purpose. The crime scene itself presented a complex puzzle of evidence, contradictions, and unanswered questions. Every detail has been examined, debated, and reinterpreted countless times over the past 28 years. The point of entry, or lack thereof, became a central question. How did the killer enter the Ramsey home? There were no obvious signs of forced entry. No broken door frames, no jimmied locks, no shattered windows. Well, there was one broken window. In the basement, a window well on the north side of the house had a broken window. John Ramsey explained that he had broken this window himself several months earlier when he was locked out of the house. He said he broke the window, climbed through, and never got around to repairing it. This window became a focal point of investigation. The window well was partially obscured by a metal grate. An intruder could potentially have moved the grate, climbed down into the window well, and entered through the broken window. However, there were significant problems with this theory. First, there was an undisturbed spiderweb in the window well, which some investigators argued indicated that no one had entered or exited through that route recently. However, spiderwebs can reform quickly, and this evidence was not definitive. Second, there was debris and broken glass on the floor beneath the window inside the basement. If someone had climbed in through the window, they likely would have disturbed this debris, leaving footprints or drag marks. No such disturbances were clearly documented. Third, beneath the window was a Samsonite suitcase positioned against the wall. Some theorized that an intruder used the suitcase as a step to climb out after the murder. Others pointed out that the suitcase's position could have been coincidental. The suitcase itself contained interesting items. Inside were a pillow and a Dr. Seuss book. Some speculated these items indicated that someone, perhaps the intruder, had planned to abduct JonBenét and had prepared comfort items. Others noted that the suitcase and its contents had innocent explanations and might be unrelated to the crime. There was one other potential entry point that received attention. A door leading from the butler's kitchen to the outside patio had been found unlocked on the morning of December 26th. John Ramsey said he had opened this door earlier that morning to check outside. But could an intruder have entered through this door during the night? Investigators looked for evidence of forced entry or disturbance around this door. They found nothing conclusive. The lack of clear evidence of intrusion at any point in the house became one of the strongest arguments for those who believed someone already inside the home was responsible. However, it's important to note that the absence of evidence of forced entry doesn't necessarily mean there was no intruder. A door or window left unlocked accidentally could have provided easy access. The Ramseys were admittedly sometimes casual about home security, particularly when returning late at night from social events. The basement itself, where JonBenét's body was found, was a labyrinthine space. It was not a simple open basement, but rather a series of connected rooms and hallways. There was a train room where Burke played with his model train set. There was a boiler room with the home's mechanical systems. There was a storage area with various boxes and items. And there was the wine cellar, a small windowless room where John Ramsey found his daughter. The wine cellar door was secured with a simple wooden latch on the outside. This meant the door could not be latched from inside the room. If JonBenét had been alive when placed in the wine cellar, she could not have secured the latch herself. Someone closed that door from the outside and latched it. Inside the wine cellar, JonBenét had been laid on a white blanket. The blanket was identified as belonging to the Ramsey household. Near her body was what appeared to be her Barbie nightgown. The presence of the nightgown has never been fully explained. Patsy said the nightgown should have been in JonBenét's bedroom. How did it end up in the wine cellar with her body? The position of JonBenét's body when found provided clues, though John's act of moving her destroyed the original scene. Investigators who documented the scene after the body was moved described the white blanket and the general area, but precise positioning information was lost. The garrote found on JonBenét's neck was a particularly disturbing piece of evidence. It was constructed from white nylon cord and a section of one of Patsy's paintbrush handles. The paintbrush was from Patsy's art supply area in the basement. It had been broken into 3 pieces. One piece was incorporated into the garrote. The other 2 pieces were found still in Patsy's art supply tray. The construction of the garrote showed a level of deliberation. Someone had taken the time to break the paintbrush, fashion the cord into a garrote configuration with the stick used to twist and tighten, and then apply it to JonBenét's neck. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated action. Some forensic experts noted that the garrote design was unusual. It appeared functional, designed to kill. Yet some aspects of it seemed almost staged, as if someone were creating the appearance of a particular type of crime. The loosely tied wrists similarly seemed more symbolic than functional. The duct tape on JonBenét's mouth became another important piece of evidence. It was black duct tape, and investigators attempted to find the roll from which it came. They searched the Ramsey home thoroughly, but never found a roll of black duct tape matching the piece on JonBenét's mouth. The Ramseys said they did not own black duct tape and did not know where it came from. This was presented as evidence of an intruder. If the tape came from outside the home, an intruder must have brought it. However, the absence of the tape roll in the house could also be explained if someone disposed of it after the crime. The cord used in the garrote and to tie JonBenét's wrists was similarly never sourced to a location in the Ramsey home, though nylon cord is a common item that could have been stored anywhere. Other evidence collected from the scene included fibers. Forensic analysis found fibers consistent with Patsy's jacket on the duct tape and entwined in the garrote cord. The Ramseys' defense was that Patsy had tucked JonBenét into bed that night, so transfer of fibers from her clothing to JonBenét would be expected. Prosecutors argued that the specific location of fibers, on the duct tape and in the garrote, suggested Patsy's involvement in those elements of the crime. Similar fiber evidence pointed to John. Fibers consistent with his Israeli-made shirt were found in JonBenét's underwear. Again, innocent transfer could explain this if John had contact with JonBenét during normal bedtime routines or if laundry from the household had mixed in washing. The most significant evidence from the crime scene, and the evidence that would ultimately change the direction of the investigation, was DNA. Forensic scientists collected samples from JonBenét's body, her clothing, and various locations in the house. What they found would challenge investigators' assumptions and eventually lead to a controversial exoneration. In January 1997, the Boulder Police Department was under intense pressure. The JonBenét Ramsey case had become international news. Media trucks lined the streets outside the Ramsey home and the police station. Reporters from around the world descended on Boulder. Every day brought new speculation, new theories, and new criticism of how the investigation was being handled. The Boulder Police Department was a relatively small agency serving a college town, known more for the University of Colorado than for violent crime. Homicides were rare. Child murders were virtually unheard of. The department had limited experience with cases of this magnitude and complexity. Commander John Eller was assigned to lead the investigation. He assembled a team of detectives, but the team was working under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The crime scene had been compromised from the beginning. Physical evidence had been contaminated or destroyed. The victim's family had hired high-powered attorneys within days. And the media scrutiny meant that every move the police made was analyzed and criticized publicly. The investigation quickly became divided between 2 primary theories. The first theory, favored by many Boulder detectives, was that someone inside the Ramsey home was responsible for JonBenét's death. The second theory, proposed by some investigators and later championed by outside experts, was that an intruder committed the crime. The theory of family involvement focused on several elements. There was no clear evidence of an intruder. The ransom note was written using materials from inside the home. The ransom amount matched John's bonus. Patsy could not be excluded as the note's author. The staging elements, the ransom note, the loose wrist bindings, suggested someone was creating a false narrative. And there were behavioral concerns about how the family responded in the hours and days after the murder. John and Patsy Ramsey's behavior was scrutinized intensely. In the hours after JonBenét's body was found, they did not behave in ways that investigators expected from grieving parents. John made arrangements to fly to Atlanta. Patsy was seen peeking through her fingers while her hands covered her face as if she were watching people's reactions. These observations were subjective and perhaps unfair, as there is no standard way to grieve, but they contributed to investigators' suspicions. The Ramseys also made decisions that frustrated investigators. On December 27th, less than 24 hours after their daughter's body was found, the Ramseys flew to Atlanta for JonBenét's funeral. They did not sit for formal police interviews before leaving Boulder. They hired prominent criminal defense attorneys Pat Burke, who was later replaced by Hal Haddon, and a team of other legal and public relations professionals. On the advice of their attorneys, John and Patsy Ramsey did not submit to formal interrogations by Boulder police for 4 months. This delay was their legal right, but it severely hampered the investigation. In most homicide cases, investigators interview family members extensively in the first hours and days, when memories are fresh and when innocent parties are most cooperative because they desperately want to help find the killer. The Ramseys eventually agreed to separate interviews in April 1997. By then, 4 months had passed. Memories had faded. The Ramseys had been extensively briefed by their attorneys. The interviews, when they finally occurred, did not provide the breakthroughs investigators had hoped for. Throughout this period, leaks from the investigation to the media created a parallel public trial. Details about the ransom note, the crime scene, and the police theories appeared in newspapers and television reports. Some of these leaks appeared designed to pressure the Ramseys. Others seemed intended to defend them. The Boulder Police Department and the Boulder District Attorney's Office engaged in very public disagreements about the direction of the investigation. Detective Steve Thomas, one of the lead investigators on the case, became convinced that Patsy Ramsey was responsible for JonBenét's death. His theory, which he later detailed in a book published after he resigned from the police department, was that JonBenét had a bedwetting incident on Christmas night. Patsy, exhausted from the holidays and under stress, had reacted with rage, striking JonBenét and causing the head injury. Then, realizing what she had done, Patsy had staged the scene to appear like an intruder kidnapping and murder. In this theory, John either helped with the cover-up or was deceived by Patsy. This theory had some elements that fit the evidence. It explained the ransom note written on materials from the home. It explained the intimate knowledge of John's bonus amount. It explained why there was no clear evidence of an intruder. However, it required believing that a mother could inflict horrific violence on her daughter and then engage in elaborate staging, including writing a lengthy ransom note while her daughter lay dying or dead in the basement. Other investigators proposed variations on this theory. Some believed Burke, who was 9, might have struck his sister during a late-night confrontation, perhaps over the pineapple found in her stomach, and that the parents had covered up an accidental or impulsive killing by their son. This theory was even more disturbing to contemplate and had significant logical problems, but it persisted in some investigative circles and in public discussion. The district attorney's office, led by Alex Hunter, was more cautious about pursuing charges against the Ramseys. Hunter and his team worked with investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and consulted with outside experts. They recognized that the evidence was problematic. There was no clear physical evidence directly tying the Ramseys to the murder. The DNA evidence was beginning to point in another direction, and the case against the Ramseys was largely circumstantial and rested on behavioral observations and investigative instincts rather than hard proof. In September 1998, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence in the case. Grand jury proceedings are secret, so the public did not know what evidence was presented or what witnesses testified. The grand jury met for over a year, hearing from dozens of witnesses and reviewing thousands of pages of documents and hundreds of pieces of evidence. In October 1999, District Attorney Alex Hunter announced that the grand jury had finished its work and that no charges would be filed against anyone in connection with JonBenét's death. He stated that the evidence was insufficient to warrant prosecution. What the public did not know, and would not learn for over a decade, was that the grand jury had actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. The indictment, which remained sealed until 2013, charged both parents not with murder, but with child abuse resulting in death and with accessory to a crime. The specific language suggested that the grand jury believed the Ramseys had placed JonBenét in a dangerous situation that led to her death and had helped someone else avoid prosecution for the crime. However, Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment. Under Colorado law, a district attorney is not required to prosecute based solely on a grand jury's decision. Hunter determined that the evidence was insufficient to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. He believed that attempting to prosecute the Ramseys would result in acquittal and would forever close the door on finding the real killer if the Ramseys were indeed innocent. This decision was controversial when it finally became public in 2013. Some viewed Hunter's refusal to sign the indictment as appropriate prosecutorial discretion. Others saw it as a failure of justice, a district attorney unwilling to hold powerful, wealthy defendants accountable. While the grand jury deliberated, and while investigators continued pursuing various theories, forensic scientists were analyzing the DNA evidence collected from JonBenét's body and clothing. What they found would eventually reshape the entire investigation. DNA evidence from the JonBenét Ramsey case has been analyzed, reanalyzed, debated, and reinterpreted more than perhaps any other forensic evidence in criminal history. It is both the most promising lead in solving the case and the most controversial element of the investigation. The DNA story begins with the autopsy and evidence collection in December 1996. Forensic scientists collected samples from JonBenét's body, including fingernail clippings, blood samples, and swabs from various areas. They also collected her clothing, including the underwear and long johns she was wearing when found. Initial DNA testing in 1997 identified DNA from an unknown male on JonBenét's underwear. Specifically, there was a mixture of DNA in the crotch area of the underwear, consisting primarily of JonBenét's DNA but also including DNA from an unknown male. This DNA did not match anyone in the Ramsey family. It did not match any of the early suspects in the case. At the time, this DNA evidence was noted but not considered definitive. There were several reasons for caution. First, the underwear JonBenét was wearing when found was brand new, several sizes too large for her. Patsy Ramsey explained that she had purchased a package of underwear for a niece as a gift, but JonBenét had wanted some pairs for herself, so Patsy had opened the package and let JonBenét take some pairs. JonBenét had apparently put on a pair of these oversized underwear that night. Because the underwear was new and had come from a package, there was concern that the DNA could have been deposited during the manufacturing process, in the factory, or during handling at the store or in transport. Touch DNA can be transferred innocently in many ways. A factory worker, a quality control inspector, or anyone who handled the underwear before it was purchased could have left trace DNA. However, in 2003, more sophisticated DNA testing was conducted. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation used newer technology to develop a more complete profile of the unknown male DNA. This profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and forensic samples from crime scenes around the country. The CODIS search found no match. The unknown male DNA did not correspond to anyone in the system. In 2008, investigators took another crucial step. They tested JonBenét's long johns, the clothing she wore over the underwear. Using touch DNA technology, which can extract DNA from skin cells left on objects through contact, they found DNA on the waistband and legs of the long johns. This DNA was consistent with the unknown male DNA found in the underwear. This finding was significant. If the DNA in the underwear could potentially be explained by innocent transfer during manufacturing, the presence of matching DNA on the long johns was harder to explain away. The long johns were not new. They were JonBenét's own clothing. The probability that the same unknown male DNA would appear in both locations through innocent means seemed lower. In May 2008, based on this DNA evidence, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey sent a letter to John Ramsey formally exonerating the Ramsey family. Lacey wrote that the presence of the unknown male DNA in multiple locations, in circumstances that suggested it was deposited at the time of the crime rather than through innocent contact, indicated that an intruder had committed the murder. She apologized to the Ramsey family for the years of suspicion and public accusations they had endured. This exoneration was unprecedented and controversial. Many investigators, including some who had worked the case for years, were stunned by the decision. They argued that the DA had overstepped. The DNA evidence alone was insufficient to completely exclude the Ramseys, and that touch DNA could still have innocent explanations. Critics of the exoneration pointed to the fact that touch DNA is easily transferred. A person can leave DNA on an object without ever being at a crime scene. If someone at the underwear factory or at the store, or anyone who handled the long johns at any point, touched those items, their DNA could have been transferred. The presence of the DNA did not definitively prove that person was present during the murder. Furthermore, if the DNA did come from the killer, Why was there not more of it? In a violent crime involving manual strangulation with a garrote and significant physical contact, one would expect substantial amounts of the perpetrator's DNA to be present, particularly under the victim's fingernails if there had been any struggle. Yet the amount of DNA found was minimal, trace amounts consistent with touch DNA, rather than the more significant DNA deposit that would be expected from violent physical contact. The Boulder Police Department did not fully embrace the exoneration. While they acknowledged the importance of the DNA evidence, they maintained that the investigation was continuing and that all theories remained under consideration. The DNA evidence had not solved the case. Instead, it had created another layer of complexity and debate. Patsy Ramsey died on June 24, 2006, of ovarian cancer, 2 years before the family was exonerated. Throughout her illness and until her death, she maintained her innocence. She gave interviews in which she expressed her frustration with the investigation, her pain at being suspected, and her desperate desire to know who killed her daughter. She said she prayed every day that the killer would be found and brought to justice. John Ramsey has continued to speak publicly about the case in the years since Patsy's death. He has appeared on television programs, given interviews to journalists, and participated in documentaries. He has consistently maintained that he and his wife did not harm JonBenét and that an intruder killed her. He has advocated for advanced DNA testing and has pushed for investigators to use new technologies to try to solve the case. Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old when his sister was killed, grew up in the shadow of this tragedy. He largely avoided public attention for years, but in 2016 he gave a televised interview with Dr. Phil McGraw in which he discussed the case and defended his family. He described his memories of that night and the aftermath. He spoke about the pain of losing his sister and the additional pain of being suspected by some people of involvement in her death. In 2016, CBS aired a documentary titled The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, which presented a theory that Burke had struck his sister, accidentally or intentionally, and that the parents had staged the scene to protect their son. Burke sued CBS and several individuals involved in the production for defamation. The lawsuit was settled in 2019 for an undisclosed amount. The theories about what happened to JonBenét Ramsey are numerous and often contradictory. They range from the plausible to the bizarre, from evidence-based to purely speculative, but they can generally be grouped into a few main categories. The first major theory is that Patsy Ramsey killed JonBenét, either in a moment of rage over a bedwetting incident or some other behavioral issue, and then staged the scene to appear like an intruder kidnapping. In this theory, the head injury was inflicted by Patsy, perhaps with a flashlight that was found on the kitchen counter. The garrote was applied later as part of the staging, or possibly to complete the killing after Patsy realized JonBenét had survived the initial blow. Patsy wrote the ransom note to misdirect investigators. John either helped with the cover-up or was deceived by Patsy. This theory fits some of the evidence. It explains the ransom note written on materials from the home. It explains the intimate knowledge of John's bonus. It explains the lack of clear evidence of an intruder. However, it requires believing a mother capable of extraordinary violence and deception. It also doesn't fully account for the DNA evidence, though proponents argue the DNA is unrelated to the crime. The second major theory is that both John and Patsy were involved in JonBenét's death and worked together to cover it up. This theory suggests that one or both parents were involved in some form of chronic abuse of JonBenét, possibly related to the beauty pageants or other pressure, and that on Christmas night something happened that resulted in her death. Both parents then worked together to stage the scene and create the ransom note narrative. This theory is supported by the grand jury indictment, which charged both parents with child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime, suggesting that both bore some responsibility. However, it faces the same logical and evidentiary problems as the Patsy alone theory. The third major theory is that Burke killed JonBenét, either accidentally during a fight or through some impulsive act, and that John and Patsy discovered what happened and staged the scene to protect their son. In this theory, the parents wrote the ransom note and created the appearance of an intruder to divert suspicion from Burke, who as a 9-year-old could not be prosecuted for murder under Colorado law. This theory has been promoted in various books and documentaries. It attempts to explain why parents would engage in such extreme cover-up behavior to protect their surviving child. It also potentially explains the pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach suggesting a late-night encounter between the siblings in the kitchen. However, it requires believing that Burke could inflict the catastrophic head injury found on JonBenét, which forensic experts say would require tremendous force. It also requires believing that parents would strangle their unconscious daughter to cover up their son's crime, which seems psychologically implausible to many observers. Burke Ramsey has vehemently denied any involvement in his sister's death. He has stated that theories implicating him are hurtful and false. The fourth major theory, and the one officially endorsed by the Boulder District Attorney's Office in 2008, is that an intruder killed JonBenét. In this theory, someone entered the Ramsey home, possibly through the basement window or through an unlocked door. The intruder may have been in the home earlier in the evening, possibly hiding and waiting for the family to go to sleep. The intruder wrote the ransom note, possibly planning a kidnapping for ransom. At some point, the intruder encountered JonBenét, killed her, and fled the scene. This theory is supported by the DNA evidence. It explains the presence of unknown male DNA on JonBenét's clothing. It also potentially explains other evidence, such as a boot print found in the basement that did not match any of the Ramsey family's shoes, and the scuff mark on the wall beneath the basement window. Proponents of the intruder theory point to the fact that the Ramsey home had been featured in a public tour of homes in Boulder earlier that year. Over 1,000 people had toured through the house. An intruder could have been someone who had taken the tour, learned the layout, and returned later with criminal intent. The theory also suggests that the intruder could have been someone who knew the family socially or professionally, which would explain knowledge of John's bonus amount. The intruder could have been someone who attended the same church, or worked at Access Graphics, or had some other connection that provided inside information. However, the intruder theory faces significant challenges. It requires explaining how an intruder could spend enough time in the house to write a lengthy ransom note using materials found in the home without being detected. It requires explaining why an intruder would leave the body in the house rather than taking JonBenét as the ransom note suggested. It requires explaining how an intruder could navigate the complex layout of the house, find JonBenét's bedroom, commit the crime, and escape without leaving more substantial evidence. Beyond these main theories, there have been numerous variations and alternative suspects proposed over the years. Some investigators have looked at registered offenders who lived in the Boulder area. Several individuals have been investigated and cleared. Some have focused on the man who played Santa Claus at a party JonBenét attended days before her death. He died in 2002 and could never be definitively ruled in or out. John Mark Carr's false confession in 2006 brought international attention but ultimately led nowhere. Carr claimed to have been with JonBenét when she died, describing the crime in disturbing detail. But his DNA did not match. He could not be placed in Boulder at the time of the murder, and his confession was determined to be a fantasy. Other theories have ventured into highly speculative territory, involving various conspiracy scenarios that lack credible evidence. These theories reflect the intense public interest in the case and the tendency for high-profile unsolved murders to attract elaborate speculation. The question that haunts everyone who has studied this case is simple. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? And why, after 28 years, do we still not have a definitive answer? The failure to solve this case reflects a combination of factors that created what many experts describe as a perfect storm of investigative challenges. Understanding these factors is crucial to understanding why justice has been so delayed. The first and perhaps most critical factor was the catastrophic mishandling of the crime scene in the first hours. From the moment Officer Rick French arrived and failed to open the wine cellar door, to the hours when friends and family contaminated the house, to John Ramsey finding and moving his daughter's body, crucial evidence was destroyed or compromised. Crime scene investigation is the foundation of any homicide case. When that foundation is broken, everything built upon it becomes unstable. The crime scene errors meant that investigators could never definitively establish what evidence was significant and what was contamination. Fibers could have been transferred innocently through normal contact, or could have been deposited during the crime. Footprints and other trace evidence were mixed with those of numerous people who had walked through the house. The position and condition of JonBenét's body as the killer left her could never be determined because her father had moved her. The second major factor was the inexperience of the Boulder Police Department with this type of case. Boulder was a college town with a relatively low violent crime rate. The department had handled murders before, but nothing like this. A child murdered in an affluent home on Christmas night by an unknown perpetrator was entirely outside their normal experience. The initial investigators made mistakes born of unfamiliarity with proper protocols for this type of complex case. Compounding this inexperience was the immediate involvement of high-powered defense attorneys representing the Ramsey family. The Boulder police found themselves facing lawyers who were skilled at protecting their clients' rights and who advised the Ramseys not to cooperate fully with the investigation. While this was the Ramseys' legal right, it created an adversarial dynamic that hampered the investigation from the beginning. The third factor was the unprecedented media attention. The JonBenét Ramsey case became a national obsession within days. The combination of elements, a beautiful child beauty queen, wealthy parents, a Christmas night murder, a bizarre ransom note, and a baffling mystery, created perfect conditions for media frenzy. News organizations competed for new angles and exclusive information. Tabloids paid for interviews and tips. The case was tried in the court of public opinion long before any criminal charges were filed. This media attention created pressure on investigators to produce results quickly. It also created an environment where leaks from the investigation, authorized and unauthorized, shaped public perception. The release of photos from JonBenét's beauty pageants led to widespread debate about the appropriateness of child beauty competitions and whether JonBenét's participation had somehow led to her death. These discussions, while perhaps valuable in broader social contexts, distracted from the actual investigation. The fourth factor was the complexity and ambiguity of the evidence itself. Almost every piece of evidence in this case could be interpreted in multiple ways. The ransom note could be evidence of an intruder or evidence of staging by a family member. The DNA could be from the killer or from innocent transfer. The fibers could indicate involvement or innocent contact. The lack of forced entry could mean an inside job or could mean an unlocked door was exploited by an intruder. This ambiguity meant that investigators with different perspectives could look at the same evidence and reach completely different conclusions. Some saw a clear pattern pointing to family involvement. Others saw equally compelling evidence of an intruder. These divisions within the investigation prevented the focus and unity of purpose necessary to drive a case forward. The fifth factor was the evolution of forensic technology during the life of this investigation. DNA technology in 1996 was far less sophisticated than it is today. Touch DNA analysis did not exist. Genealogical DNA searching was decades away. As the technology advanced, new possibilities emerged for testing and analyzing evidence. But this also meant that evidence was consumed in earlier testing and might not be available for newer techniques. Decisions made in 1997 about what to test and how to test it affected what could be done in 2010 or 2020. The sixth factor was the passage of time itself. As years turned into decades, witnesses died or their memories faded. Patsy Ramsey's death in 2006 removed one of the central figures in the case. Others who might have had information passed away. Physical evidence degraded. The trail grew colder with each passing year. The seventh factor, and perhaps the most frustrating for those seeking justice, is that even if investigators developed a strong theory about who killed JonBenét, proving it in court to the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt has always been challenging. The compromised crime scene, the ambiguous evidence, and the high-profile nature of the case meant that any prosecution would face enormous challenges. District Attorney Alex Hunter's decision not to sign the grand jury indictment in 1999 reflected this reality. He believed, rightly or wrongly, that the evidence available would not be sufficient to secure a conviction. This brings us to the present day and the question of whether there is still hope for solving this case. In the past 5 years, there has been renewed focus on the JonBenét Ramsey case, driven largely by advances in forensic genealogy technology. The technique that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018 has revolutionized cold case investigation. By uploading crime scene DNA to genealogical databases and building family trees, investigators can identify suspects even when their own DNA is not in criminal databases. The DNA profile from the JonBenét Ramsey case, the unknown male DNA found on her clothing, is intact and has been preserved. This means it could potentially be used for genealogical analysis. The process would involve uploading the DNA profile to databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, looking for partial matches with people who have submitted their DNA for genealogical research, and then building family trees to identify possible suspects. This technique has been extraordinarily successful in other cases. The Golden State Killer, who committed murders and assaults in California in the 1970s and 1980s, was identified in 2018 after decades of being unknown. Other cold cases from the 1980s, 1990s, and even earlier have been solved using this method. John Ramsey has been a vocal advocate for using this technology on his daughter's case. He has given numerous interviews in recent years calling on the Boulder Police Department to send evidence to private labs that specialize in genealogical DNA analysis. He has stated that he believes this represents the best and perhaps only hope for finally identifying JonBenét's killer. In 2021, the Boulder Police Department announced that they were working with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and other partners to review the case using the latest forensic technology. They stated that they were committed to using every available tool to solve the case, including advanced DNA analysis. In 2022, the department reiterated this commitment and provided some limited updates. They indicated that they were actively working on DNA testing and analysis, though they declined to provide specific details about what evidence was being tested or what methods were being used. This secrecy is standard in ongoing investigations, but frustrating for those following the case. In late 2024, there were reports of renewed activity in the investigation. Sources indicated that additional DNA testing was being conducted and that investigators were pursuing new leads. The Boulder police chief made a public statement reaffirming the department's commitment to solving the case. Specific details were not disclosed, but the activity suggested that progress might be being made behind the scenes. The critical question is whether genealogical DNA analysis can solve this case. The answer depends entirely on whether the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing actually came from her killer. If the DNA is from the killer, and if that person has relatives who have submitted their DNA to genealogical databases, then yes, the case could potentially be solved in the same way the Golden State Killer case was solved. Investigators would identify the family tree, narrow down potential suspects, and then use traditional investigation techniques to determine which family member was in Boulder on Christmas night 1996. However, if the DNA is not from the killer, if it was deposited through innocent transfer at some point before the crime, then genealogical analysis will only identify an innocent person who happened to leave DNA on the underwear or long johns at a factory, store, or through some other innocent contact. This would be a dead end that could consume significant investigative resources and potentially lead to innocent people being scrutinized. This uncertainty is why some investigators remain cautious about placing too much faith in the DNA evidence. Touch DNA is powerful but also problematic. It can be transferred innocently in ways that are difficult to track or verify. There is also the question of whether the DNA profile is suitable for genealogical analysis. Some DNA profiles are more complete than others. The more complete the profile, the more likely it is to produce useful matches in genealogical databases. If the profile from the JonBenét case is partial or degraded, it might not produce actionable results. Despite these uncertainties, the possibility that genealogical DNA could solve this case after 28 years has created renewed hope and interest. True crime followers, journalists, and the Ramsey family itself are watching closely for any developments. Beyond DNA, there are other investigative avenues that could potentially be pursued. Advances in other forensic techniques might yield new information from old evidence. Investigators could re-interview witnesses with fresh perspectives. New tips could emerge as people who had information but were afraid to come forward find the courage to speak. Sometimes cold cases are solved not through new technology but through persistent traditional detective work. The Boulder Police Department has maintained an active tip line for the case. They continue to receive and investigate leads. They have stated that they receive tips regularly, though most do not lead to actionable information. They encourage anyone with information about the case to come forward. What would justice look like in the JonBenét Ramsey case after all this time? If the case were solved tomorrow, if a suspect were identified, arrested, and prosecuted, would that provide the closure that people seek? For John Ramsey, now in his 80s, justice would mean knowing the truth about who killed his daughter. It would mean clearing his family's name once and for all. It would mean that JonBenét would not be forgotten, that her killer would be held accountable, and that perhaps other families could learn from the mistakes made in this investigation. For investigators who have worked this case for years or decades, justice would mean finally answering the question that has haunted them. It would mean knowing that their efforts, Their dedication to finding the truth had ultimately succeeded. For the public, which has followed this case with fascination and frustration for nearly 3 decades, justice would mean closure to one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American crime history. It would mean that the system, despite its failures and missteps, had eventually worked. But justice would also mean grappling with uncomfortable truths. If the killer turns out to be someone from within the Ramsey family, it would mean that a parent or sibling killed JonBenét and lived with that secret. If the killer turns out to be an intruder, it would mean that an innocent family was subjected to nearly 3 decades of suspicion, accusation, and public torment for a crime they did not commit. Either outcome would be painful. Either outcome would raise questions about the investigation, the media coverage, and the rush to judgment that characterized so much of the public discourse about this case. The legacy of the JonBenét Ramsey case extends far beyond the tragedy of one child's death. This case changed how law enforcement handles child murder investigations. It exposed critical flaws in crime scene management and highlighted the importance of proper protocols from the first moments of an investigation. Police departments around the country studied the mistakes made in Boulder and implemented training and procedures to avoid similar failures. The case also sparked national conversations about child beauty pageants. Images of JonBenét in full makeup, wearing elaborate costumes, and performing on stage at age 6 disturbed many viewers. Questions were raised about whether these pageants sexualized children, whether they placed unhealthy pressure on young participants, and whether they could attract people with dangerous intentions. While beauty pageants continue, the JonBenét case brought increased scrutiny to the practice. The case demonstrated the destructive power of media speculation and trial by public opinion. The Ramsey family was convicted in tabloid headlines and television speculation long before any charges were filed. This rush to judgment, based on incomplete information and investigative leaks, showed how media coverage could undermine both the presumption of innocence and the integrity of an investigation. The case also highlighted the challenges of DNA evidence. The JonBenét case was one of the early high-profile cases where DNA played a central role, and the ambiguities and uncertainties surrounding the DNA evidence in this case illustrated both the power and the limitations of the technology. It showed that DNA could exclude suspects, but that the presence of DNA did not necessarily identify a killer. For those who have followed true crime, the JonBenét Ramsey case remains uniquely compelling because it contains so many elements of a perfect mystery. There are multiple plausible theories. The evidence points in different directions. Smart, dedicated investigators reached different conclusions. Nearly 3 decades later, we still don't know definitively what happened. This uncertainty is both fascinating and frustrating. It keeps people analyzing the evidence, debating the theories, and hoping for a resolution. But it also means that JonBenét's killer has never been held accountable. It means that a 6-year-old child who should have grown up to live a full life had that future stolen from her, and no one has paid the price for that theft. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. Her name combined the first names of her father, JonBenét Ramsey, and her mother, Patricia Paw Ramsey. She was the younger of 2 children, with a brother Burke who was 3 years older. By all accounts, JonBenét was a bright, energetic child who loved performing. She participated in numerous child beauty pageants, winning titles including Little Miss Colorado and National Tiny Miss Beauty. She took dance lessons and singing lessons. She was in 1st grade at Martin Luther King Elementary School in Boulder, and was reportedly doing well academically and socially. Her family described her as happy and loving. Friends of the family said she was sweet and well-adjusted. Photos and videos from before her death show a smiling child who seemed to enjoy life. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to go to middle school, high school, and college. She deserved to choose a career, fall in love, and live whatever life she wanted to create for herself. Instead, her life was cut short at age 6 on Christmas night in her own home. 28 years have passed since JonBenét Ramsey was killed. 28 years of investigation, speculation, and searching for answers. 28 years of advances in forensic technology. 28 years of her family living under suspicion. 28 years without justice. But the case remains open. The investigation continues, and somewhere, in the DNA evidence or in information that has not yet been uncovered, the truth may be waiting. The Boulder Police Department continues to work this case. They review tips. They pursue leads. They apply new technologies to old evidence. They have not given up, and they have stated publicly that they will never give up. John Ramsey continues to advocate for advanced DNA testing. He continues to give interviews and to keep his daughter's case in the public eye. He wants answers before he dies. He wants to know who killed JonBenét. He wants his family's name cleared. He wants justice for his daughter. The public continues to follow the case, hoping for a breakthrough. Every few years, a new documentary or book examines the evidence from a fresh angle. Every time there's an announcement of new testing or new leads, interest surges. People want to know what happened to JonBenét Ramsey. Perhaps the DNA will finally provide the answer. Perhaps genealogical analysis will identify the unknown male whose DNA was on JonBenét's clothing. Perhaps that person will turn out to be the killer, and after 28 years, justice will finally be served. Or perhaps the DNA will lead to another dead end, another innocent explanation, another disappointment in a case filled with them. Or perhaps some other evidence, some overlooked detail, some witness who has remained silent, will finally provide the key that unlocks this mystery. The only certainty is that someone knows what happened to JonBenét Ramsey on Christmas night, 1996. That person might be the killer. That person might be a witness who saw something but never came forward. That person might be someone who heard a confession or who noticed something suspicious but did not realize its significance. That person could still come forward. Tips can be submitted to the Boulder Police Department at any time. Even after 28 years, even a small piece of information could be the catalyst that finally solves this case. This case remains one of the most significant unsolved murders in American history. It has captivated the public, challenged investigators, and resisted solution despite massive resources and attention. But unsolved does not mean unsolvable. The truth is out there. Someone knows what happened, and perhaps finally, after 28 years, that truth will come to light. If this investigation has resonated with you, if you want to see cases like this pursued until justice is served, please subscribe to True Crime Vault. We're committed to examining these cases in depth, to respecting the victims, and to keeping these stories alive until answers are found. Hit that like button to help this investigation reach more people, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened to JonBenét Ramsey? Do you believe the DNA evidence will finally solve this case? What theory makes the most sense to you based on the evidence? And please, if you have any information about this case, no matter how small it might seem, contact the Boulder Police Department. After 28 years, JonBenét Ramsey deserves justice. Her family deserves answers, and the truth deserves to be told. Thank you for watching this investigation. These are not just stories. These are real people, real families, and real tragedies that continue to impact lives decades after they occur. JonBenét Ramsey was a 6-year-old child with a bright future ahead of her. That future was stolen. But the search for truth continues. The pursuit of justice continues. And we will continue to investigate, to question, and to remember until finally the truth is revealed.